Hello and welcome back. And I'm sorry, I can't quite hear you over the pings, dings and notification noises from you guys sending me messages requesting the ZimaOS versus Fygo OS comparison video. Let's face it, right now in 2026, if you're building your own NAS from scratch, yes, SSD and hard drive prices are billy bunkers right now, but there has never been a better marketplace for DIY NAS software. It isn't the old days of Synology, QNAP and TrueNAS anymore. There is so many options in the market, and I would argue in terms of user-friendly accessibility, these two platforms offer the very best NAS offerings right now for those stepping away from cloud, stepping away from turnkey, or stepping away from the complexity of pre-existing hardware built on TrueNAS, built on Unraid, built on Open Media Vault. These are two great NAS offerings, but I would argue they've got very different target audiences in mind. And although they're both fighting to be the repository of your data and your data sovereignty, in this video, we're going to go through their strengths, their weaknesses, and hopefully by the end of this video, you'll decide whether ZimaOS or Fygo OS is the best NAS offering for you. So straight away, there's a lot of muck here on screen. I'm going to remove myself from camera because frankly, there's already enough to show you right now with two NAS operating systems side by side. Now, the reason I've got all of this muck here on screen is because the first thing I want to talk about is the user experience. Now, depending on your own level of complexity, what clients you use every single day of your life to get through, right now, you're going to have very different feelings about what you're seeing here on screen. Let's minimize that, minimize that, minimize that, and minimize that. This is the desktop user experience on the right, ZimaOS, and on the left, Fygo OS. Fygo OS, I would argue, Linux, Android, that kind of stuff. We are running these at the moment, both at 110. Actually, I run that at 100% zoom there. And between the two of them, both of them are enjoyed at their best at a full screen experience. But the only way to show you both is to kind of do it in this split screen fashion right now. But I'll say right now, in terms of user experience, the more simple of the two is easily ZimaOS. The big buttons for everything you want to do, the settings menu right there in ZimaOS to sort of open up. Even the menu options themselves are very, very simplified. They have gone for a core back-end functionality and a lot of the individual apps and services running as containers. Not unusual, but it's just generally the UX is a great deal more easy to use. Now, with that, there is, of course, going to be limitations, something we'll talk about later on. But at the very least, between these two platforms, ZimaOS is by a country mile the less intimidating of the two. Customizable widgets here on the desktop, even simplified graphs for network information, CPU and RAM utilization can be broken down a little bit. Even the drive and RAID and storage creation is really simplified. We'll get onto file folder management later. Now, by contrast, Fygo OS stylizes itself in a great deal more like a number of systems we've talked about from turnkey, your Synologies, your QNAPs. It's not as intimidating as something like a TrueNAS or an Unraid with a lot of storage wizard creation, a lot of the hand-holding stuff. The layout is a great deal more stylized maybe on a tablet user interface, but the sheer amount of configurations, the sheer amount of options, whether it is you're simply looking at managing for a bunch of users, managing for a bunch of clients, managing different kinds of storage areas, managing multiple individual networks, remote access, security protocol, file service support, there is just more yarn on the ball here from what we're seeing here in Fygo OS. Now, the reason that's important that we have to get this out the way early doors is because of the pricing. Because let's face it, a number of you looking at this are going to be thinking about the price of these platforms. Because I'll tell you right now, they have gone different ways. They both arrive with a free tier. The free tier for both of them gives you limited access, limited storage, I should say, limited access to the operating system's true capabilities, but they both also arrive with a lifetime license. ZimaOS's lifetime license currently at $29, unlimited drives, unlimited users, free updates long term, everything included. The lifetime there on Fygo is largely identical, but it is worth reminding you there are more features and more bells and whistles included. But you may also have noticed there it's $299 later on. It's only an introductory price right now for Fygo. So depending on when you're watching this, do double check where the pricing sits. But the pricing breakdown is actually a little bit more diverse on Fygo, with $49 per annum if you choose, versus $0 if you want to try the full software, but for 30 days. So maybe if ZimaOS down the road included a trial period, and that would be hard to code in and open the door to exploitation, but still there's no avoiding ZimaOS is the more affordable option of the two, and that is an affordability that is only going to improve over time. But the number next to the dollar sign isn't everything. It's about value and what you get for your money. And the breakdown of what you get is pretty substantially stacked, with Fygo taking the lead. Even if we look at like the client tools, both of them arrive with Windows and Mac client tools that you can download to synchronize with your local system in slightly different ways, more on that later, but they also both arrive with support of an iOS and Android application, but there's also multimedia applications available for Fygo and that local sync tool. And although there are other bells and whistles such as the knowledge base bridging tool there in OZ Sync, a tool for Chrome to synchronize with the NAS and access and control it via this widget, as well as a migration tool for CasaOS and ZimaOS, as well as from a ZimaOS system to a new one. It has to be said that the level of applications and services, I would argue, is better here on Fygo. But when we are talking about the client tools, I will say both have got their own individual strengths. So, for example, if we focus here on ZimaOS, ZimaOS's desktop client application here not only includes Peerdrop that can be run on desktop or mobile devices to allow cross-platform file sharing, but on top of that, you can synchronize with a local folder that's on both the NAS and on your local system easily for backup or just synchronization, and you can create multiple of those. Also, if you are running a Thunderbolt application, a Thunderbolt enabled bit of hardware, you can take advantage of it depending on your CPU of choice to have direct connectivity on ZimaCube. Fygo OS doesn't seem to have that feature right now, but it is on their roadmap. Continuing with the ZimaOS appliance, you've also got the backup operations tool built in there, so it isn't just synchronization. But remember, this is file folder backups, not any kind of live OS image level backup. Now moving over to Fygo OS, what you have is that file synchronization. You don't have the backup op in the same way, and although it is configurable with kind of logs there to sort of manage things in the background, I would argue there is a better range of client services available with ZimaOS's client rather than Fygo OS's client, and we'll talk about mobile apps later on. That said, Fygo has the ace up its sleeve of taking advantage of file pinning and file streaming. Now, why is that significant? Well, when you're looking at, for example, this folder here that's synchronized between the ZimaOS NAS and my client system, this has to have all of the data in one place. So we've got all of these files here, and as we can see, we go to properties, and it's taking up that amount. We can see it on the NAS, but we can't really do much more than that. So for example, we run this file here, we just open it up in something. Let's open it up in paint.net. It will say that it can't, obviously, but at the very least, once we open up that file, it will have to take up space on the NAS as we try to access individual files. Now, some users don't want to have to do it that way. Some files they want to live for a while and then get automatically cached out later. And that's where file pinning and file streaming comes in. Because yes, on the Fygo OS system here, if I access a file or a folder, it will allow me to open it up, and see that little green tick. It is taking up room on my local system. But if I choose to, right click, go into the options, there is a contextual option here that allows me to completely free up that space. And again, doesn't delete it from the NAS, it simply frees it up on the local system, or I can pin that file permanently to always have a copy on the local two systems side by side. That is an incredibly useful feature, and one that Synology in their Synology Drive and QNAP with their QSync application have championed and had for a very long time. So even though the client app for ZimaOS, I would argue, is better, that one feature in Fygo OS really does bring things closer together. And continuing on the subject of client tools, hopefully with me here in the middle of the screen, I've got two pre-recorded bits of footage here either side of me right now with the mobile application available for ZimaOS and the mobile application for Fygo OS. And unlike what I described just now with the client tool, between these two being a little bit better on ZimaOS on balance, I've got to say when it comes to the mobile applications, Fygo absolutely wipes the floor with ZimaOS. There is practically, so not everything, but practically nothing that you can do in the desktop and mobile appliance for Fygo OS that you can't do in the mobile app. The mobile app is presented fluidly, it's reactive, its latency is very, very good. It just does the job in an incredible way. And just side by side right now, the Fygo OS mobile application is throwing enormous shade there at the ZimaOS one, which just happens to come across as quite basic by comparison. It feels really mean to say it, simply because ZimaOS's tool does the job, and it allows for file browsing, it allows for a little bit of system overview, but you can't really control the NAS much with it. You can't do much beyond file folder level access, and of course, localized backups. It's not even that tailorable in the backup. So if you are looking at a NAS for the mobile appliance or, iPads and stuff like that, you're going to have a much, much fuller experience with Fygo. Now, returning to the subject of both of these appliances in the web browser, here via a local IP, I'm connecting to both of them on the local area network. If I had to be really TLDR about it, I'd say ZimaOS feels like a more user-friendly Unraid, and Fygo OS feels like a more user-friendly TrueNAS. Now, that is more than just a superficial observation. When we look, for example, at the storage management here on Fygo, we sort of alluded to this earlier on. When we look at both of these systems and how they manage the storage is managed a little bit more basic, at least in terms of its visualization here on ZimaOS. And that might very well be your bag. And support of BTRFS and ext4 there, file system control, and different RAID configurations for different, 1, 2 disk failures is supported there. And once you do create the storage areas, you not only can take advantage of the OS drive and its storage, again, as we'll talk about in the file folder manager in a moment, but a lot of the integrity, the RAID functionality and recovery in the background has been optimized over the last 2 years of ZimaOS, but you're not really going to see those improvements. You're going to feel them down the road. And you can do stuff, you can add little bells and whistles and check the health of individual drives, but that's really it in terms of the storage manager. Now, by comparison, the storage manager of Fygo, it's night and day. So for example, ext4, BTRFS and ZFS support natively all mean that the advantages of this legacy ext4, the self-healing and low impact footprint of BTRFS, or the full featured functionality of ZFS is afforded to you here. Whether it is you're taking advantage of one large array or multiple RAID arrays, each of which could be used for different kinds of tiered storage, are available here within this one storage area more fluidly. And then from that, different functionality, different controls from drive hibernation individually per drive to the whole system, obviously recommended in a larger array. But on top of that, when it comes to managing the individual storage areas and tweaking some of the ZFS advantages, it's just, again, I hate to use that phrase, but night and day. And some of the features and functionality that are native to all three different file systems on offer here can be taken advantage of. Notwithstanding SSD caching, of course, which in ZFS has got its own bells and whistles to be rolled in. But this gets doubled down even further when you look at things like the integration of iSCSI natively within Fygo OS. And from there, we're looking at things like snapshots. We're looking at things such as the file folder management there between the two of them, because they both arrive with file folder management, and the results are super clear here in ZimaOS on the right-hand side. The ability, for example, to create an area of encrypted storage currently on the beta is available. An encrypted storage area, by the way, that you can set to dismount after a given period of time or completely dismount upon a reboot. Very, very useful indeed, whether it's with a passcode or a downloaded USB key. File folders aren't quite as good in terms of customized encryption here on Fygo, and that may be a big deal breaker for you there. So if we create a folder here on this side, again, we'll create a test folder there, test folder 2, And there we go. We've got the options, and we can add and share the drive, and all that usual stuff is there for sharing our files, be it on Samba or any one of the different users on the local area network, or externally if you are creating remote access to these. But I think it would be fair to say that if encryption's your bag, at least in terms of the folder level encryption, ZimaOS does have that extra, arrow in its quiver. That isn't to say that Fygo doesn't factor in encryption. It takes advantage of end-to-end encryption. It takes advantage of encrypted protocols with its remote access, just the same as ZimaOS. But the catering and creation of an encrypted storage area is nowhere near as easy and accessible as it is on ZimaOS. Now, it counters that by generally having a very feature-rich environment. So, for example, whether it is you're managing team folders, managing remoted mounted storage, the external storage, USBs and more, as well as managing individual storage areas that you've created for individual apps. It's all accessible here with a great deal of management there in the background and configuration, whether it is you're taking advantage not only of different tools there in the background for different file services and what the rules are for overwrited files and more, but on top of that, it also allows you to take advantage of deduplication tools that are natively built in. Things on ZimaOS, I would argue, are simpler, but that's not a bad thing, I think, for some users out there. The options are a lot clearer, they're slightly less intimidating, but that's because there are less features and services there available to navigate between anyway. The options are all there, they're all kind of contextually sound. And I do think if you're looking for simple storage, this is all going to be music to your ears. But we can't overlook the fact that Fygo is just providing such a wide range of tools to the end user, a huge range of applications, services and storage functionality and features that is just way beyond the remit of what ZimaOS is offering. Another great example would be how backups are managed. Again, although you can create that encrypted storage area within ZimaOS, when it comes to the backup opt, so if we go ahead and open up their own backup operation, we open it up there, we open it up against the backup opt that we find here on Fygo, we've got the individual services, it's lovely and clear. If we manage one of the backup operations there, we can configure it where it's going back and forth. And there is, the option to create a schedule there. You can configure it, or we could create a brand new one to create our new backup operation. Select if we want to back up from a cloud to LAN. And by the way, it's quite handy that you can actually manage backup operations that aren't even on the ZimaOS system itself if you choose. But you can go ahead, for example, choose the local Zima storage. From there, you can select another area of storage or select a cloud connected service. But just for the sake of convenience, let's go ahead and select those there. And then it creates the task. It's that straightforward. Now, on Fygo, we create our task. We'll select that sync task there. We'll select a new file path. Go for that one there. We've got our path, and as you can see, we're in step 1 of 6. We've got the targets, but we have more kinds of target that we can use. So if we go ahead and choose another location on this NAS, we'll select that team folder there. From there, we have got the exclusion rules that can be gone through. We've then got different rules of the scheduling, and that's really it. Again, it's a little harder, but there are more configuration options open to you. Once you factor in the robust nature of ZFS as well, you can't really overlook that you are getting more for your money, quite literally for your money in Fygo, than ZimaOS, if you plan on using it though. And in terms of apps and services, if you come from a turnkey NAS solution like Synology or QNAP, you're probably going to be more at home with what's going on Fygo than you are on Zima. Now, we're only going to look at in-house apps, because I don't think it's fair to give ZimaOS or Fygo OS credit for apps outside of their own eco. Other people made Emby. Other people made all of these tools. They didn't. So when we look at the main in-house applications and services, so approved and certified, community applications there, what becomes very clear on ZimaOS is that the bulk of the apps and services you are going to be utilizing in Zima come from third parties. The base level experience and some of the other bells and whistles, like their file explorer that we just looked at, the virtual machine tool that allows you to download pre-made ISOs, the peer drop application. There are some apps that are first party, but the bulk of the software experience from Zima, at least at this time, is through third parties when it comes to hosting your data. Now, Fygo haven't gone above and beyond more, but at the very least they have included some. Now, some of them, like OpenOffice, I would argue isn't them, or only Office I should say, is third party, but there is still a lot more first party tools and integration, and I would argue a lot more apps and features native to the software that aren't apps and services. Overall, you're getting more in the Fygo OS than you are over Zima, between these two at least. But it's about presentation. What do I mean by that? I mean, on Fygo you have an app store, and on Fygo you have Docker. Now, let's be realistic, the bulk of the applications in Fygo are being installed as containerized applications there, and you can access a third-party repository there and go through the database to find out different repo options for your containerized deployment for your app. But when you look at Zima, there isn't an app here that says Docker. What there is what's labelled as an app store. And I do think there are going to be users that are going to bestow credit, or at the very least credibility, of these apps towards Zima or vice versa. And yes, as soon as you can see here, you go into a containerized appliance, you can see just how complex it is, and therefore the appeal of one-click installations of these apps is desirable. But I just think that is a worthy note here for those coming straight into a new world of self-hosting to know the distinction between these two and the way apps and services are being presented and available. I know it might seem like I'm labouring the point here, but what I mean is, for example, Jellyfin and Plex are available here, and then the App Center is there if I want to install other multimedia applications there on Zima. Whereas on the case of Fygo, not only do I go, if I wish, to go to the Application Center here, where I can take advantage of MB, take advantage of Jellyfin, although there is no Plex app there, I still have the option of going into the Docker appliance, so a separate Docker appliance, rather than using the App Center, which is it's effectively Docker by another name, allowing me to install it in this way. But on top of that, I can just use their own multimedia appliance, which has metadata scraping, which has use of hardware transcoding, which has all of the bells and whistles, and as mentioned, does take advantage of the client app. So I just think that's an important distinction between these two platforms, in that the way that the applications and services are included, but also how many of them are first and third party, and how that information is also being presented to novice users. Next up, security. Let's face it, you're storing a lot of data on this thing, and I think a lot of users, for good and for bad, have a tendency to overtrust software. Again, neither one of these platforms I would wholly and exclusively trust for business level, remote level backups and storage. Maybe on the local when you've got the right security stuff in place, but both of these are brands that are rolling out their own software, which is available without the hardware. And frankly, depending on your own stance on these things, the amount that you trust these systems, your mileages are going to vary. That is no, slander I'm throwing at either one of these two brands, but I do think the level of security afforded to them in remote level access. So, for example, in ZimaOS, you can take advantage of their own relay systems to connect and, access and share your data remotely. Same on ZimaOS, the same goes here on Fygo here. And both of them do arrive with the ability to create a remote access identity via HTTPS with a certificate to access your system remotely. But above and beyond that, things are slightly different. We've already mentioned that both of them take advantage of peer-to-peer encrypted protocol, but in the case of, and it's a very simple thing, but in the case of Fygo OS, when we go into the user area, we go into security, we have the option of two-factor authentication. Where the hell is two-factor authentication on ZimaCube? Now, it is worth highlighting you can enable two-factor authentication with your remote access account, but you can't add local two-factor authentication. And for me, that's a big deal. So when I go into my user settings here and I go in and there's my user, I can change my password, again, change my avatar, but the remote protocol, whether it is for individual users I'm creating or the admin user in of themselves, I couldn't find any way without using a third-party plugin, by the way, to add two-factor authentication there. Again, I can with remote access, but just not on the local sessions. Now, the local session two-factor authentication and using your authenticator of choice is desirable, but above and beyond that, the levels of configuration and control of things like banning IPs, block attempts when passwords have been entered a certain number of times wrong, and max attempts, they're more configurable on Fygo OS. And although ZimaOS does have a lot of features behind it. I'm kind of surprised these aren't native features straight out the gate built into the OS on day one. Yes, it's a lower cost platform, but because of CasaOS behind it and ZimaOS, and by the way, I still love ZimaOS, I will say I'm very, very surprised that two-factor authentication hasn't been integrated early doors, and managing network protocol there as well is doable. And again, as you can see with the remote access protocol has all been set up here, and don't worry, I'll be changing that after the record. The level of configuration and control of network connectivity, I would argue again, is better here on Fygo OS. The amount that we can configure and control and change has been layered a lot better and more configurable, albeit more intimidating, on Fygo than it is on ZimaOS right now. So if that is important to you, it is definitely something worth bearing in mind. There may also be those of you wondering about what the hardware base of installation here is. I'm pleased to say that if you go ahead with Fygo OS, you may have noticed this earlier on during the downloads, but you can download it and install it on both ARM systems and x86. Now, ZimaOS is for x86 processors from Intel, AMD, etc. If you want to take advantage of this software on ARM, you have to use CasaOS, which is less feature-rich and arguably doesn't see the same level of hardcore development that now ZimaOS, their premier platform, is enjoying. Again, that's great for ZimaOS, but if you are running more affordable ARM systems, maybe running on those arcade chips, some of the other processors rocking out on those single board servers, that may be something of interest to you when picking between these two platforms. But what about the community support between these two? I think it would be very fair to say that there has been longer community support and engagement on the Icewell, ZimaOS and CasaOS platforms. Larger communities, larger development teams there, and a lot of the work being done by the community and both with the community as well has to be applauded on the Zima side of things. That isn't to say that Fygo doesn't have a meaningful community background. It's got a massive community background indeed. Some of the development happening there in the background, and indeed the source code availability and updates with the larger community as well as two Linux maintainers on the board has to be applauded. But the level and extent to which you want to know you can see the development publicly does differ between these two brands. Again, we'd have to really go into the micro instances to see just how different it is, and definitely on what level of community engagement and utility of development there is. But I would argue in terms of sheer time, you have to give Icewell and ZimaOS the benefit of the doubt here over that of Fygo. Fygo is still one that's been around for a while, both as Fygo and FNOS in the background, Fygo being the more Western software and FNOS being the Eastern, or what would we say, Asian perhaps, variation of the software running in parallel, but still, make of those points what you will about community support and the code base. Above and beyond that, it comes down to feature sets. For example, the photo management tool that's native to Fygo OS with AI photo recognition and some of the deduplication that I mentioned earlier on and scanning. It's great, and it's all built in natively, and I just think there are bells and whistles here for those making their way away from turnkey NAS solutions that are just going to be damn near irresistible by comparison, whether it is simple file folder management or if you want to take advantage of something like Image or other third-party tools. The point is that both of these have that. But the Fygo side has that and more if you want to take advantage of AI functionality. Again, whether you're going to install your AI agent or LLM model of choice, depending on your hardware, the options are the same on both. But there is more afterwards once you take advantage of Fygo OS. And again, as we mentioned, if two-factor authentication is your bag, or some of the storage functionality and features I mentioned, with the exception of ZFS, there will be an app for that in the App Center of ZimaOS. So don't think just because you're paying less for ZimaOS that you're not going to get them. It just means you're going to have to either wait a while for Zima/Icewell to add them, or you're going to have to take advantage of command line or third-party containerized apps in order to get that job done. Fygo arrives as a more fully featured and complete NAS operating system in every way out the gate. There is a reason it is commanding that higher price tag. It is saving you time and money in order to get there. And if that's important to you, if your time costs you more money than $199 to $299, chances are this video has already convinced you that Fygo was the way forward. But bear in mind, It is the newer platform of the two, technically. And ZimaOS, there is an argument here that ZimaOS is not trying to do 100 things. It's trying to do 10 to 15 things exceptionally well, which in terms of feature development, I think a lot of software devs would argue is maybe the right thing to do. But Fygo is trying to do a lot of things, and I can't say they're half-arsing it. Normally at this point, my argument would be that Fygo is doing too many things at once and therefore doing some things well, whereas ZimaOS is doing fewer things better, but it isn't the case. Fygo is seemingly doing a lot and still doing a great job of it. Is it perfect? Hell no. I do think there are ways to go, something we've covered in the respective reviews of both of these platforms. For example, the RAM utilization in Fygo is still in need of optimization, and of course some of the ZFS stuff in the background is going to eat away at the system resource utilization. But thanks to configuration and controls that are built in natively to the appliance, you have the level of control and pull back and pull forward as you see fit. And again, with a larger feature set out the gate, this may be more desirable to you to get this all sorted out on day one in a way that ZimaOS still feels like it might have a ways to go for you. But if you're only aiming for the fundamentals, if you're only aiming for your storage to do what it does, shut up, do your job and be quiet, ZimaOS might be the one for you if you're looking for storage options with the lowest impact on your hardware. But that is really it. This has been Fygo versus ZimaOS. Neither one of these is definitively better than the other. They're just not, because they're designed for different end users. If you're a power user, I would argue Fygo is almost certainly the option for you. If you're not a power user and you're looking for something simple, affordable, but reliable in every sense of the word, ZimaOS might be the one for you. It's just a question of feature set and configuration, and also just how much you want in and out of your server. Now, there are links below to get hold of either one of these softwares. I don't get anything for those. They're just included. They're not affiliated. There are links to affiliated products that would support us what we do here at NAS Compares. That would be great. But if you found this helpful, there's always like, subscribe. That's great for the channel, notification bell, all that junk. But otherwise, just enjoy the videos. Watch the videos, and that keeps us going. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.